Good evening, and welcome to Skep Talk, the monthly speaker series hosted by the Bay Area Skeptics. Before tonight's presentation, a few words about Bay Area Skeptics. As North America's oldest skeptical organization, we are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, logic, and rational thought. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists such as Carl Sagan and magicians such as James Randi established the scientific skepticism movement out of concern about the popular fondness for pseudoscience and the lack of public science literacy. Scientific skepticism embraces evidence-based civil discourse on health, education, consumer protection, and especially the investigation of extraordinary claims. Using the scientific method, we hope to promote skeptical inquiry to reduce irrational thinking in society. This talk is supported by Bay Area Skeptics members such as you. Please visit us at baskeptics.org or join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup. Consider supporting us through convenient monthly donations via Patreon. Patrons receive premiums such as discounts and free t-shirts for our annual Skeptical Conference. But more importantly, members help us make the world just a little more reasonable and rational. And now, tonight's speaker.
Hello again. I'm Bill Patterson for the Bay Area Skeptics, and I'll be hosting tonight's Skep Talk. Have you ever called to mind a memory from your childhood that seemed so real that you could list certain details about it and even recall feeling scared or confused, only to find out later that from your mom that the events in question never occurred? I've occasionally impressed myself by remembering songs or scenes from TV shows with fairly remarkable accuracy, even after several decades. But I must say, what is far more interesting is when I've been chagrined to find out that certain other memories reflect moments or circumstances that somehow my mind made up out of whole cloth. Where do such memories come from? Do they evolve from real memories that have degraded over time? Do they occasionally pop up out of nowhere? Can they be manipulated or induced? Oh, and are these infrequent anomalies benign, or might they lead to harm in some way? How do we tell the difference between false memories and true ones? Well, someone who also finds false memories fascinating is Jill Yamashita. Jill Yamashita, PhD, is professor in the Department of Psychology and has been teaching at California State University, Monterey Bay since 2009. She did her undergraduate at UC Davis in psychology and earned her master's and doctorate from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2003. She's taught at Willamette University, UNLV, and St. Xavier University. She specializes in statistics, face perception and eyewitness memory, the study of the cross-race effect, and false memory paradigm, among other fields of interest. Tonight, to present her talk, The Truth About False Memories, the Bay Area Skeptics is proud to welcome Professor Jill Yamashita. Good evening, Jill, and thank you so much for gracing us with your presence.
Good evening, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Bill. And thank you all for inviting me to speak with you tonight about the truth behind false memory.
All right, well, Jill, why don't you just take it away? What do you got for us?
Okay. All right. So this is just a quick overview of what I plan to talk about tonight. The first is the basics. I'm going to define memory. I'm going to go over 3 essentials that are necessary for memory to work properly. I'm going to talk about different types of memory, go over different types of long-term memory, because that's really where the false memories can, change and become false memories. I'll define false memory, go over potential causes for false memory, and go over real-world implications of false memory. So the first, being a memory person, of course, I have to define things. So memory is our mental capacity for retaining, holding on to, as well as reviving, bringing forth facts, events, impressions, or of recalling previous experiences, things that we have experienced in our past. And memory is also the basis for our views of self and our personality. Now, this one you might go, wait a minute, what? Think about this for a moment. Who we are and what we believe in is based on our experiences of the past. While our only experiences of the past are our memories of that information, as well as maybe videos or pictures or other people who were there with us, right? So a large part of who we are actually is defined by our personal experiences, which of course are defined by our memories, okay? So memory isn't just holding things in for bringing it forward. So in other words, holding it there, maintaining it there, and bringing it forward. It's more than just that. It's helping us to identify who we are, how we identify ourselves. So the purpose for memory, and this is how memory works, is it's essentially to recall the gist or the main points of events that occur. Now, the reason why I bring this up is it explains a lot of what can cause false memory, because our memory system, at least most people's memory systems, really hold on to the main point of events that occur, but we lose a lot of the details of the facts and information of the experiences that we have gone through. So memories include information from all of our senses as well. So it holds the main point of the events. It also gives us information about how we felt at the time, so the emotion of the time, as well as sometimes we might have visual information that comes at us, or a smell can trigger memory, taste as well. So our five senses oftentimes are also included within the memory to help us remember the main point or gist of an event. You may not realize it until a memory is cued. So that's the main purpose for memory. It's really to help us remember the main point. Now, why do we need to remember the main point of events? For survival, of course, surviving in our environment, remembering who is familiar, who is not familiar, who is friendly, who is foe. All those pieces of information help us with survival of our world. So memory is a really, really important part, not just for who we are, but also for essential points of things we need to remember for future. All right, so the three essentials to memory. The first is encoding. Now, encoding is essentially the creation of new memories. It's our ability to create new memories. Now, this is obvious why it's an essential to memory, because if we don't have the ability to encode new memories, we have no ability to learn new things. So encoding is extremely important. Think about it. If you're meeting new people, you need to be able to create new memories to go with those new people so that you can remember them. Maintenance and consolidation. This is another essential to memory. Think about how memory, we have to hold it there, right? It's not being used all the time. It needs to be maintained. So we have a system in place. A lot of our long-term memories, for example, are maintained and stored in our frontal lobes. So it's really important for us to be able to maintain and hold those pieces of information. Now, let me tell you something. As time goes by, maintenance does decrease over time. So that doesn't mean that the memory disappears, not at all. It just means that it gets less and less details. Over time, we lose more and more details. So for example, what you did today, you'll remember a lot of that tomorrow. But a week from today, a lot of those small details go away. A month from today, even more of those details go away. So maintenance is still there. It still holds the gist of the memory. It just doesn't hold all of the tiny details that were originally encoded with it. And again, that goes to the main purpose for what memory is used for, the gist, the main point of what the memory is about. And if the details really don't help with reinforcing the main point, a lot of those small details go away. And the third essential to memory is what actually is perceived to be memory, which is retrieval. Retrieval is our ability to recollect or recall information that's stored or maintained within our brain, right? And the thing about retrieval that's so important is that we need to be able to get to that real fast, 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 fast. So retrieval, of course, like I said, is what most people think of about when it comes to memory, but all three of these are essential. How essential? Well, if you lose the ability to encode information, you have what's called anterograde amnesia, which means you are a person who lives in the past. You can remember what you've done, but you cannot create any new memories. So you don't know what you just did 5 minutes ago. Okay, you're not able to create any new memories. If you lose the ability to retrieve, that is retrograde amnesia. You can create new memories. Absolutely. You can encode them, you can create them, and you can learn new things, but you lose pieces of who you are. So a lot of times with retrograde amnesia, you don't lose all of your long-term memories, you lose some of them, which means on average, retrograde amnesia is 1 to 3 years of memory loss that you'll never get back. But that's on average. There are people who have actually lost decades worth of information and have basically they think that they're 20 years younger than they are. And personality goes back to what they were at that moment in time. So who you are now wouldn't be who you are with retrograde amnesia. So those are the three essentials to memory: encoding, maintenance, and retrieval. If you notice, I put consolidation in parentheses because part of maintenance is the consolidation process, creating your short-term memory, moving it to long-term memory, and that's called consolidation. So those are the three essentials to memory. Now, when it comes to memory, there are three different types. There's sensory memory. Sensory memory is your 5 senses. They take information in, but it's at a subconscious level, and it's not really processed. If it's processed, it gets attended to, and then it becomes the next part of the process, which is called short-term memory. In memory research, we call it working memory, though, because short-term memory is not truly accurate anymore. That's why working memory is the preferred term now in the field of memory. And that's because our working memory is constantly taking things in from the world, taking things in from your long-term memory, putting it all together and allowing you to interact with your world in the here and now. It's your conscious ability to react to the world around you. And that's our working memory. It's temporary, so it doesn't last forever unless we rehearse it in our head over and over and over again. So it's like that phone number you're trying to remember. You rehearse it, rehearse it, rehearse it. And as long as you rehearse it, it can stay in your working memory. But as soon as you stop rehearsing it, poof, it's gone. And the last is long-term memory. Long-term memory, of course, are memories that are from childhood all the way up until what you did a month ago. Long-term memories are exactly what it sounds like. They're memories that are not of the right now. They're of our past, something that we had done a while ago. If you want to be technical, a lot of people in my field think of long-term memories as memories that are about 3 years or more. So 3 years or older. But in research, when it comes to long-term memory, a lot of times it could be as short as a week. So there's a variation in how one would determine long-term memory. But working memory, 20 seconds without rehearsal, that's pretty much it. Long-term memory, you can have memories stay pretty much forever. Okay. Now, when it comes to long-term memory, there's 3 different types of that. I know you're going, oh my gosh, she's throwing all these terms at me. I promise it's almost over. So we have episodic memory. Now, this is one that you need to, well, this is kind of sound funny, but remember, because episodic memories are essentially memories of things that you have experienced. So they're personal recollections, things that you have personally experienced. And again, it could be from childhood, it could be from young adulthood, it could be from adulthood, it could be from a week ago. Semantic memory are memories for things like concepts, facts, and information. So I like to call semantic memory my trivial pursuit memory. It's memory for things that, who is the 16th president, right? Oh, Abraham Lincoln. Who was the first president of the United States? Right? George Washington. So that's semantic memory. They're memories of concepts and things like that. So all of my information that I have about memory and perception, those would all go under semantic memory because I don't remember when I learned them. I just have that information in my brain. Okay. Episodic memories, they can be unstable over time. Like I said, you lose some details. Semantic memory is very stable. It remains consistent. Once you have the information there, it's pretty safe. And then you have procedural memory. Procedural memory is also known as muscle memory because procedural memory is, well, it's implicit. So if I were to ask you to write your signature, right? You don't have to think about how to write your signature. You just do it. It's muscle memory. That's procedural memory. So the one that we use in class all the time, forgive me for using that example, is riding a bicycle. You, over experience of riding a bicycle, your body starts to remember how to do it. And then once you know how to ride a bicycle, your body just knows what to do. Now, sure, it might take you one extra try to get up on a bicycle and not, tip over, but I kid. But essentially, muscle memory, procedural memory are the same thing. And that's one of the ones that when it comes to trying to remember things, procedural memory is what we call implicit. You don't have to think about it. It just happens. Whereas semantic memory and episodic memory, you actually have to go into your brain stores and take out the information and go, oh, here it is. So you're actually getting it. So it's considered explicit memory. Okay. Episodic memory, remember, is going to be the important one to keep because episodic memory is your recollections of your personal experiences. And that becomes very important when we start talking about false memory. Okay. So before I start talking about false memory, false versus true memories are accurate memories. Here's a question. Is a person able to tell the difference between a false memory and a true one? Now, it's rhetorical. I'm going to give you the answer. But think to yourself, could I tell if something was a false memory or not? Now, Bill gave a little bit of the punchline away when he said, oh, yeah, this happened to me. It's happened to most of us. The answer is no. We can't tell the difference between a false memory and a true one. Even the ones that I'm going to talk about that were done in the laboratory could not be differentiated between true and false. In fact, scientists are still trying to figure out ways to be able to tell a difference between true and false memories. And they're still working on it. Okay, so let's get into false memories. So first, I like to define things. A false memory is simply a memory for something that did not happen. The memory may be incorporated into an existing memory, or it could be a standalone memory. It could be either one. So a false memory could be inserted into a memory that already exists, or it could be something that, is of an experience of its own. Okay. And if you're wondering what's the difference is that a standalone memory is an inserted or implanted memory versus an incorporated memory is you're taking an existing memory and you're adding on to it. Now, the thing about false memories is that they're extremely easy to make. Yes, I said that. False memories are extremely easy to make. And yes, we will go over potential causes for it and how this can affect us in the real world. But let me just put that out there that false memories can be quite easy to add on. I mean, let's put it this way. Anytime you see a picture of something you did when you were a kid, or anytime you see a video of something you did when you were a child, you might be adding on to an existing memory by watching that video or by looking at those pictures, because those pictures give you extra information. Now, I didn't say false memories had to be bad. Sometimes false memories, which are not memories that we created, but I didn't say that they had to be bad. I didn't say they had to be false memories for things that aren't true. I just said that they're memories for something that we did not necessarily remember happening. Okay, so I talked about 3 different types of long-term memory, and false memory does affect long-term memory, but it doesn't affect all of them. It only affects episodic memory. So semantic memories are not influenced by false memories. Procedural memories are not influenced by false memories. Episodic memories are. So recollections of our past experiences are highly influenced by false memories, which is unfortunate. And the older the memory, the more likely we can insert extra information into it, whether it's misleading or inaccurate information or false memory that's adding accurate information. So what I'm trying to say is the newer the memory, the harder it is to put in a false memory. Not that it's impossible, it's not. It is definitely possible to insert false memories into newer memories. It's just harder because you have more details for the newer memories. Okay, so there are 3 big causes that we know of for false memory, and there's other causes as well. I'm going to go over suggestibility, the misinformation effect, which actually is related to suggestibility, and I'm going to go over the misinformation. And then I'm going to go over a couple of other causes that can lead to false memory. So the first, suggestibility. Suggestibility is the tendency to incorporate information from external sources into a personal recollection. So an example of this is implanted memories. So to give you an idea about this, I had a student that told me when we were talking about this in believe it or not, it was an intro to psych class. And where we were talking about suggestibility and about implanted memories. And he goes, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." So he told me about, he had a conversation with a really good friend of his, and his friend was telling him about this camping trip that he and his family went on. Now, mind you, this is a family that he's gone camping with before in the past, but this was not an experience together. So his friend told him everything that they did, and he said, so he saw his friend a couple years later, and he goes, "Oh, you remember this trip we took a couple years ago?" And he described exactly what happened at his friend's camping trip with his friend's family, but he wasn't there. My student wasn't there with them. He unknowingly, through simple suggestion, through simple incorporation of the information, added on a whole entire memory that he did not experience. And his friend goes, "No, you didn't go with us on that trip. You went on other trips with us, but not to this place." I said, I went over it with you, but and I described it to you, but no, we didn't go. And it took him a while to realize that his friend was telling the truth, that he really just kind of implanted the memory, because he had gone on previous trips with them, and he basically incorporated multiple of those trips together, and so he kind of inserted himself into, the vacation. So implanted memories are memories for an event that did not occur but was suggested. So, like my student said, he basically had a friend who, or not basically, he had a friend that went on a camping trip, and he was describing it in such detail that, the student, vividly imagined what, he did and all the different events that he went through. And he now had this brand new memory that wasn't his, that was somebody else's, that was suggested by somebody else. Now, in the laboratory, there's something called the false memory induction. So false memory induction is a procedure that's used for actually creating a memory through repeated questioning. Elizabeth Loftus is a really big name in the study of false memory. So a lot of the foundational research was actually by her lab. So Loftus and Pickrell in 1995 did a study that looked specifically at implanted memories. Now, the reason why Loftus and Pickrell looked at implanted memories was essentially due to the fact that there were stories about girls who had memories of their father abusing them. And then it came out later that the abuse never occurred. And Loftus and Pickrell wanted to better understand, how could this happen? How could you have a completely added memory, an implanted memory put in? So Loftus and Pickrell in 1995 did a study, and they had participants in their study. And before they had the participants come in, they contacted either a sibling or a caregiver of the participant. And from that, they got 2 real childhood events. So 2 events that this participant had gone through. And then they asked them, had this person ever been lost in the mall? And if they've never been lost in the mall, that this is a lost in the mall study. Okay. So imagine you're a participant, you haven't even gone into the lab yet, and the researchers are calling up either a sibling or your parent and basically asking about 2 childhood events that actually happened so that they can do this study. So when the participant came in, they were asked about the 2 real child events. So they go to the first one. So can you tell me about, situation A that you went through when you were a child around 6 years of age? Okay, so those are the details. Okay, any other details you want to provide? Okay, then they ask about the second one. So story B, right? Childhood event B. They ask about that, and they ask them to recollect as much information as they can about that event. And then the third thing they ask about is being lost in the mall. So they ask them, say, okay, so can you tell me about the time you were lost in the mall? And the initial reaction of the participants is simply, that never happened to me. So they said, are you sure that never happened to you? No. And then they kept on asking questions about it. So they said, well, why don't you tell me what would happen? Imagine, so they actually went over they being the researchers, actually asked them to imagine what would have happened if they did get lost in the mall, if they didn't remember. Obviously, none of them remembered because it didn't happen. Okay, so this is day 1. Now, participants are asked to come back 1 week later. And again, they're asked about the 3 childhood events. And they're asked about whether, or not they remember it, what kind of details they could remember. And 25% of those participants recalled details from being lost in the mall. They actually had specific details about being lost in the mall. Now you might go, 25%, that's not that many. Well, considering that none of them in the beginning thought that they were lost in the mall, and now 25% of them did. That's actually a big increase. A lot of other scientists have studied this exact same procedure for memory induction, and they've found from 25 to 40% of participants recalling details that were not given to them about being lost in the mall. Now, of course, all the participants were told after the fact that they were not lost in the mall. But what they found out later is that some of them actually called home, and their caregiver, the sibling, whoever gave them the information, actually played along and said, "Oh yeah, you got lost in the mall." They didn't give them any details. They just said, "Yeah." So it kind of reinforced. So I thought that was interesting that some of them actually called home, and the person that they called actually went along with the scientists. Of course, all of them, by the end of it, knew that it never happened. Misinformation effect is when you are presented with post-event misinformation. So you're given information that's incorrect. So inaccurate information after you witnessed an event. And this post-event misinformation has been known to obscure, change, or degrade the memory of the original event that is experienced. Okay, so this is specifically inaccurate information that is being given, and specifically it's being given to see what would happen to one's memory. So Loftus, Miller, and Burns in 1978 did a study looking at the misinformation effect. Now, what they did is they had participants view a slideshow of a car accident. Half the participants were given consistent information in a survey, and the other half were given inconsistent or misleading information. So half of them saw a stop sign, the other half saw a yield sign, and in the survey, half of them got a question about a stop sign, the other half were asked a question about a yield sign. So half of it was inconsistent, half of it was consistent, depending on what group you belong to. People were asked to come back a week later. Participants given consistent information were 75% accurate. 75% accurate. So if you're giving consistent information, then you're more likely to recall things correctly. Well, what about that misleading group? The misleading group, the group that had inaccurate information, had only 40% accuracy, which means 60% of those were incorrect in what they recollected. So the misleading information did, in fact, change things. So those who saw a stop sign, they were asked about a yield sign, they now remembered a yield sign in the picture, which was not true. So that's an example of the misinformation effect. And it's not that difficult to do, unfortunately, for misinformation. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about real-world consequences when it comes to the misinformation effect. So misattribution. Misattribution is assigning a recollection or idea to the wrong source. So source monitoring or source memory is your ability to recall the when, the where, and the how information was acquired. So it's trying to remember the correct source. Misattribution is remembering things incorrectly. This is actually very, very common. Misattribution is a very common thing to happen with our memory because of the fact that this is one of those details that our brain goes, oh, well, that's not really that important. I don't really need to remember where I saw something or where I did something. I don't need to have that information. I just need to remember that I did that something. So source memory is not hugely important to the memory system. So the memory system says, well, that's nice, but it's part of the details that oftentimes is forgotten. So that's why assigning a recollection or idea to the wrong source is actually a very common occurrence. Source monitoring is the ability to distinguish whether our memory is our memory or if the memory is someone else's memory. Now, this becomes kind of important. Think of my student who implanted a whole entire memory because he thought the memories were of his own, not of his friends. So he actually thought the memory was actually his own, and that was a huge misattribution error. He actually had the wrong source. Failures in source monitoring oftentimes lead to false memories. So you misremember things. Maybe you saw it on the news, but you thought you read it in the newspaper, and someone asked you, "Oh, where did you hear about that?" And you tell them the wrong source, right? And you might go, "Well, that's not a big deal. I mean, it's a false memory. I'm remembering the wrong source, but when does that really matter?" Well, we'll talk about that when we talk about eyewitnesses. So the source of where information comes from is not considered an important detail to our memory system, but we're going to find out very shortly that it actually becomes a problem when it comes to the applications of, well, source monitoring errors leading to misattribution errors, which essentially is our ability to create a false memory. Because our weakness in source monitoring leads to our ability to be more malleable for the memory, which means that our memories can be easily changed, which is unfortunate. And if you're wondering, oh, is there any way I can help work on this? Yes, you just have to put more effort into trying to remember where you heard something or who you heard it from or those details. You have to actually put the effort into it, though. Okay, so 2 other causes that I didn't talk about, those 3 ones, misattribution, suggestibility, and misinformation effect are 3 major causes. But sometimes, like I said, false memories are caused simply by watching family videos. In other words, we have the memory and then we add on to the memory using these family videos or photos that we see. I brought this up earlier, and this becomes an issue only when you go, "Oh yeah, I remember that vividly." Do you really remember it vividly, or is it because you saw a family video? Do you remember it vividly because you saw it in a photo? Right? A lot of times we think we have our childhood memories held really, really tight and really, really detailed. We actually don't. But when we have photos and we look at the photos, or we have family videos and we watch the family videos, we actually get reinforced because, we know that it's true. It's right there in front of us. It's in, visual format. But a lot of times we may have had a sketchy memory of something that may have happened, but now you have all these rich details that you can add in. Again, sometimes false memories are not bad, they're just more. Now, Dease Roddicker-McDermott paradigm, or the DRM paradigm, is one of the things that I actually study for the false memory paradigm. So Dease, Roddicker, and McDermott, actually Roddicker-McDermott in 1995 did a study that looked at false memory for the same reason that Loftus looked at false memory. They wanted to better understand how false memories can be created. Now, Loftus looked at adding in whole entire memories, but Roddicker and McDermott really wanted to just understand how false memories can just be created. So they actually replicated Dease, who did a 1959 study and found false memories, but no one seemed to be interested in false memories in 1959. So his research pretty much got ignored until Roddicker-McDermott kind of revitalized it. That's why it's called the Dease-Roddicker-McDermott paradigm, because of the fact that they replicated Dease's study. So, for example, what they did is they had people study this. So I'm going to have you guys study this list of words, and I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do it. Okay, so I'm not going to have you do a recall yet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Dease-Roddicker-McDermott paradigm, and then I'm going to have you guys recall. Okay, so in this procedure, Roddicker and McDermott basically used a list of semantically related words to try to induce false memories for items related to those word lists. So they took associates, semantically related words, that were all related to one critical lure or target word. And the idea was, would you then recall that critical lure, that word that wasn't presented but was related to all the others? Okay, so now I would like you to go ahead and write down as many words from that list as you can recall. Okay, you guys ready? So here's the list. You have hot, snow, warm, winter, ice, wet, frigid, chilly, heat, weather, freeze, air, shiver, Arctic, frost. They're all related to the word cold. Now, Roddicker and McDermott used Dease's list of the semantically related word lists, but they used several of them. And they had their students, Roddicker and McDermott actually did this in their classes, and then they did it in the laboratory afterwards. And they just wanted to show that this was possible. In fact, 80% of people will recall the critical lure, the target word, even though the word wasn't presented. And you might go, well, what's the harm in that? Well, the harm is that you're not remembering things exactly as presented. Okay, you're not remembering them wholly accurately. You're remembering it well, but you're adding things in. Okay, and that's what they showed over and over again. In fact, the DRM paradigm was considered so sensitive design that you could actually tell someone about this experimental design and what they expected to find, and you would still get over 60% of the people recalling the critical lure. Okay, so even when told that this happens, and the reason why is that the way that we actually store our words that are semantically related, like this list, they're actually tethered together in our memory system. The way our memory system creates it, we have this network of words that are related to each other. And when the word in the middle, cold, is surrounded by all these other words that are presented. Here's, hot, ooh, cold slightly gets activated. Snow's over here, it's getting activated. Oh, cold slightly gets activated. So cold, the word cold is indirectly being activated with each word that is related to it, as long as it's closely related to that word. They found that the words that are related but not closely related are not as good in creating the false memory. So you can actually have false memories for something as simple as words, and it's very easy to do. So easy to do that, in fact, even when you tell someone that this happens, it still happens. Okay. So this leads to the last part of my talk, real world implications. And of course, I already kind of alluded to it, eyewitness memory. So when it comes to the real world implications of false memory, eyewitness memory is something that the judicial system depends upon us to remember well. In other words, we are expected, if you're an eyewitness to an event, to a crime, to something that occurred, a situation that occurred, you are supposed to remember things as it happened. You're supposed to remember all the details. You're supposed to remember lots and lots of details. And remember, that's not how our memory works. So I'm going to talk about how suggestibility, how misinformation effect, and how misattribution can actually mess with an eyewitness memory. Okay, so remember, suggestibility is where we incorporate things. So when you are discussing an event, such as a robbery, it actually leads to an integration of information. Remember, we oftentimes don't remember who said what. We don't remember if it's our memory specific or if it's someone else's memory that we heard, right? So we have this integration of information. We're not able to parse out who said what. So now it's all part of your memory, okay? So this can be helpful with an increase in correct information, but it also can be detrimental because it has been known to increase false information as well. Now, you might go, well, why does this really matter? You have the same people watching, the same event. What harm does that really serve? Well, the thing about our perception, everyone's perception is unique to themselves. And what we remember is based on what we deem as important. Well, what I think of as important might be different from this person over here or this person over here. So our memories for the exact same event are oftentimes going to be different. Not bad, just different. And because of that, if we talk with somebody else and we integrate those other people's information with our own, we're no longer able to figure out what was suggested versus what was remembered by me. Uh-oh. Now, there was a case, it was a robbery of a sporting, not sporting goods store, like an Ace Hardware, a hardware store. And there are 3 witnesses, and the witnesses before the police arrived were all talking about it. And 2 of the witnesses remembered a screwdriver being used as being held up to the neck of the cashier. And the 3rd person could have sworn it was an ice pick, but they're thinking about it. Go, oh, they're right. It must have been a screwdriver. So all 3 witnesses say the same thing, and what happens? It ends up being an ice pick. So the suggestion of the other 2 actually switched a person's memory. So they didn't remember. They they thought it was this, but oh, I must have been wrong, and now they remember it with the false information. Okay, so suggestibility can lead to incorrect memory. Now, misinformation, as the name implies, if you have misinformation, so for example, again, you have the people with the screwdriver and they suggest that it's misinformation, it's inaccurate information, and then that leads to a person what? Remembering incorrectly. So what Loftus also found with a different study, she discovered that misleading questions can lead to false memories. So she did a really interesting study where the the participants watched again a slideshow of this time an accident. So it was a different slideshow, and oh no, I apologize. It was a video. So afterwards, one of the questions to one group was how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? A second group was given how fast were the cars going when they smashed each other. So it's just one word change in the question, but that one word completely changed the responses. If the participants were given the word hit, they had speeds of around 30, 34 miles per hour. But when you say smashed, you now have the numbers go way up into 40, 45 miles per hour. So misleading questions can easily lead to remembering things incorrectly. So after these studies were replicated over and over and over again, things like, did the suspect have a gun, is no longer asked. It's now, did the suspect have a weapon, right? No implication that a gun was present. That way, you don't have any chance of leading to a kind of an implanted or misleading information into your own memory. Because believe it or not, the questions that are asked after an event can change what you remember about the event. So, simple one-word change discovered it. And Loftus didn't just stop there. She did another study with lots of different verbs. So she had, let's see, bumped along with smashed, hit. So she had, I think, 7 or 8 different verbs that she used. And depending on which one she used, determined the speed that people recollected from the video. So misinformation can be simple as a misleading question. Misattribution. Now remember, misattribution is based on errors in your source memory, not remembering where you heard something or who you heard something from. So it's the inability to distinguish which is your own memory versus something that was said by another person. This can, of course, be problematic because if you remember saying something or you remember doing something and it actually was somebody else, well, you're not going to make a very good eyewitness, right? And what's interesting is that you also might misremember where you saw somebody. So there was a case where a woman was being attacked in her home. Okay, she was watching television. There was an interview going on the television, and she was being attacked in her home. And when the police came over to ask her about identifying, so basically, do you remember what this person looked like? Can you identify them? So she goes, yes. So she describes the person in detail about what he looked like. And they said, oh, okay. So they went in and did their due diligence, and they figured out who that person was based on the eyewitness's memory of the person. And they asked this person, he actually was a memory scientist of all things, probably how it got into a memory book. And they said, well, where were you on such and such day at such and such time? And he goes, well, I was actually being interviewed on television. It was live. So he had like one of the best alibis you can have, right? Live television. It turned out that the woman who was attacked was watching the show where he was being interviewed. And she misremembered where she saw him. She confused her memory of the attacker and the memory of the person on television. And you might go, how could someone do that? It's a lot easier than you would think. There have been lots of other cases where a person saw someone, maybe at the grocery store, and then they were asked to remember what a person looked like who robbed a bank. And you're actually taking the person you saw at the grocery store and you're putting them in the bank, right? So this has happened many times. So we call them deadly misattributions, where you're remembering incorrectly where you saw somebody. And so it can lead, if they don't have an alibi like the memory scientist did, then it could lead to the wrong person being arrested. Okay. So, in conclusion, false memories cannot be separated from true memories. There are many causes to false memories, and they occur unconsciously. So we are not aware that the false memories are occurring. And I only went over a few of them. There are, of course, more ways that false memories can be created than the ones that I talked about. The consequences of false memories can be detrimental when it affects eyewitnesses. Now, again, I truly don't want to blame an eyewitness because, one, they're under a lot of stress because they just witnessed a crime. And two, they're being asked questions that they normally would not remember details on. That's just not how our memory works. And with that, I will say thank you very much again for allowing me to take your time and talk about false memories. These are the references for the articles I talked about, or the research that I talked about. And if you need to contact me, I'm always available by email.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. That was a wonderful talk. And there's a lot of detail there. I have many, many, many questions for you. And at some point, we're going to have to meet up at Fiddler's Green, have some bangers and mash and a beer, and talk about this more. But since time doesn't permit for that, I wanted to start with one question that was my own question. And that's is something that I think is fascinating, which has kind of entered the lexicon of all this, is something called the illusory truth effect. And that is where a person will hear something, like hear some sort of statistic or something like that, in the context that it's not true. So they hear something, and basically what they hear is that we have discovered that such and such is not true, or something like that. And then a month later, you come back, and some of those people will actually remember that it was true. They kind of go from a negative idea, I guess, to a positive idea. And I'm wondering, is this something that would fall under your umbrella here? And what can you say about that? Is it a thing? We have replication problems with some of these novel effects that are reported in some obscure journals. Is the illusory truth effect a thing? And what would you say leads to that?
I actually have never heard of it. The illusory truth effect. I could see people misremembering things simply to fit better with their own ideals. So I could see it happening. I personally haven't read anything about it, and like I said, I haven't heard of this concept or memory topic. But it doesn't surprise me that things like that will occur, because our memory is one of those weird things where, again, it goes back to our prior experiences. And I don't want to get into it too deeply, but we have something called schemas, which are our mental framework of how we basically put things into their own categories, and our expectations, everything is built upon schemas. And we have these expectations for things. And if a study comes out and says one thing, but it goes against what we would expect, we might change it over time because we heard it once. And when we hear about something once, it does not stay with us very well. In fact, it's very easy to just forgotten. So it's not surprising that someone would take something that they heard that they didn't really believe is counter to what they expected and remember it the opposite way. So that now it fits with what they would expect.
Okay, so yeah, so there's like a cognitive bias sort of thing going on here.
Yeah, we call it confirmation bias.
Right, yeah. Okay, yeah. There. Okay. Well, for not ever hearing about it, you just gave a really good explanation of it, I think. But thank you. We have another question for you. All right, from Jay Diamond. Does time from memory, length of memory, or number of memories seem to affect reliability of memory?
Okay, so let me take the first one. Does time from memory affect reliability? Absolutely. So the older the memory is, and let's say that you haven't really gone back to your memory stores and brought that memory forward to maintain. In other words, you haven't talked with someone about it in a long, long time. The chances of remembering it very well, you remember the big points, the main points, and that will be remembered reliably. Because again, that's what memory's for. It's to remember those main points. But the details oftentimes are completely unreliable. You might get the details from a photo, you might get details from another person's story of the same event. So the length of time, how old the memory is, definitely. Now, the length of the memory, believe it or not, oftentimes can get squished. So I've actually had students do recollections of events, and I tell them to choose one thing, and they'll actually take a whole vacation and smush it into one thing. So it could be, a whole entire week or 2 weeks, and they smush it into one paragraph of information. So the length of the memory sometimes doesn't matter, because the gist might just be, vacation in Hawaii. So they might not remember most of the details, but they'll remember being in Hawaii. And you're lucky if you can remember who you were with when you went to Hawaii, unless it was your very first time. Novel things tend to be remembered better. And the number of memories, now here's the thing is, if we practice, repeat the memory over and over again, multiple times over spread out a longer period of time in between, we tend to remember and have reliable memories then. But we have to work at it. I tell my students this all the time. A lot of them go, I have a horrible memory. I said, well, you can fix that. You just have to work at it. And they're going, I have to work at it. Yeah. Because they want their phone, right? They want their phone to do everything for them. And I said, no, what you need to do, put your phone down, walk away, and then use your memory. And of course, if you need to use the calendar, use the calendar. But I said, try to use your memory so that when you practice it, your memory gets stronger.
Okay, and then in follow-up, then you mentioned something there that was very interesting. You said that if it was a first time something, the novelness of it, I guess, sticks with you a little bit better. And yet we have I think we have examples, and maybe this is kind of orthogonal to that particular point, is that when you have people that claim that they can remember absolutely everything happened when Kennedy was shot, or absolutely everything happened when the space shuttle blew up in 1986. And then when we actually test those people, as I understand, the data shows that they're not actually that good at remembering those things. And
yes, you're describing flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories are highly surprising, highly emotional events that happen. And you're absolutely right. You are not going to be any better at remembering that than an ordinary memory. However, the emotionality attached to that memory is much higher. And so when you go back in your memory and you see in your head what happened, it's more vivid. And because it's more vivid, people think they're better at remembering that event, but they're really not. Lots of scientists have studied flashbulb memories to specifically look at the fact that people go, oh, yes, I know for a fact that this is exactly how it happened. And they've shown over and over again that it's no better than a regular, ordinary memory.
Interesting. All right, thank you. Okay, here's another one from John. What is the term for memories from 20 seconds to 1 week ago? They're not short-term, 20 seconds without rehearsal, and not long-term, months or more. So do they have a name?
It's a great question. We don't have a name for them. A lot of times we just call them, now not the 20 seconds. 20 seconds we call short-term memory or working memory, and we leave it at that. And unless you rehearse it, it's usually gone and forgotten. But we don't have something that's called short long-term memory, or something cutesy like that. We don't have an in-between term. So a lot of times long-term memory just kind of gets attached to things that truly wouldn't be considered a long-term memory. But I mean, a week ago to some people is considered long-term memory, because if you look at the malleability of it, it's still pretty weak compared to what you might remember the next day.
I see. Okay. And then I'm going to murder this, and I apologize in advance. Salab Agarwal, is substance abuse a documented cause for false memories?
It's a great question. Now, substance abuse, I'm going to go strictly to just alcohol for now. Alcohol has been known to be horrible just for memory. Now, I'm not talking about false memories. I'm just talking about memory in general. The way that alcohol affects the brain, it slows everything down. It makes things harder to remember because we have a more difficult time attending. A large part of memory is attention. If you can't attend to something, then a lot of times we don't remember things very well. Now, does that mean that it's a cause for false memory? Not necessarily. They've actually shown that some people who are drunk remember things better than people who have divided attention. So I will not say that it's a cause for false memories, but I might say that they're more susceptible to false memories because their memories are not very good. They have poor memory because of the fact that they're under the influence of alcohol, and alcohol is known to be a problem for creating memories.
Interesting. Okay, and from Jeannie Scott, the president of the Bay Area Skeptics, might social interactions be recorded differently than events that don't have a social component? Thinking of a husband who remembers details from a trip 20 years ago, but not details of conversations.
So a lot of our experiences in memory are based on multiple facets, right? Multiple factors. One of the things is importance. So what do you put importance on? What do you find interest in? A lot of these factors, a lot of time, bring in what we remember well. If you're not interested in something, then a lot of times that information is lost. Now, I'm not saying that your husband having a conversation with you and him not remembering the details, I'm not saying that he's not interested in what your conversation is. I'm not saying that at all. It's just, it has to do with our amygdala. And when our amygdala is excited and interested in something, we're likely to remember it. And a lot of times things like vacations are going to be more likely to be remembered. So a trip from 20 years ago will be likely to be remembered probably because it was very enjoyable and had a lot of different things that were done during that time. Versus conversations, a lot of our conversations, especially if it's with someone that you have conversations with a lot, they tend to meld together. So a vacation you took 20 years ago that you only did one time might be seen as, oh, this really novel, this really interesting thing. So you'll have more details about it. But when you have lots of social interactions with someone that you converse with a lot, those conversations meld together, and you may not remember the details from each individual conversation because they kind of glom together into one thing. That's one thing our memory also does is, for example, I go to lots of meetings because I'm an academic. My meetings, I can't remember what I talked about in each of those meetings. I can tell you approximately what we did in the meeting, but I can't tell you specifics. Why? Because all my meetings blend together. And so your question about the social component for memory, again, I haven't studied that, so I don't really know about how the social component will affect a person's memory for something. All I can tell you is that the more times you converse with someone, the more times you are going to blend those conversations together.
Okay, well, Jill, you've been extremely generous with your time, and I appreciate that. And this has been most informative. We got a question here from Nicotia. All right. How often have interrogations planted false memories, and how essential is stress or distress contributory to false memories? What a good question.
Okay, so there's, of course, false confessions. There's three different types of false confessions. One type of false confession is where a person confesses because they're trying to protect someone. They know they didn't do it, and they go into the police station, they say they did it. The second type of false confession is where a person is under interrogation for a long period of time. They just want to go home. They know they didn't do it, but they confess to it anyway because they just want to go home. They want to it's been so long. And then there's a third type, which is actually very rare, thankfully. And that's where a person is under, again, extreme interrogation. And the person confesses to crime and believes they did it. And this is an internalized false confession. This is where a person is told, I know exactly how you did it. So the police tell them how they did it, what weapon they used, what route they took in the house. They go over X, Y, Z, everything that of how the crime took place. And it's repeated over and over and over again. And if a person has a very vivid imagination, they imagine this going on in their head, and eventually they start to believe that they actually did it. There was a case of a young gentleman. He was interrogated over several hours. And he was told that he basically slaughtered his parents. Okay, so he's being told exactly how it happened. He's shown pictures of what happened, and they said just confess. And again, this is after many hours and being told and being shown pictures, and eventually he says, "Yeah, I did it." It came out many years later that someone else confessed to it, had the murder weapon. And so they released him. They released him from prison. And he goes, "Why are you releasing me?" I said, "Well, you didn't do it." He goes, "Yes, I did." He has full memory of killing his own parents. And he didn't understand why he would be let go, because he believes to this day that he did it. And, scientists are still trying to figure out what can lead to it. Now, yes, stress can lead to it, but there's a lot of other factors, because you can have people go under the same amount of stress, being interrogated for the same amount of time, and still believe that they're innocent. So to understand what would lead a person to believe that they did something that they didn't do, a horrific crime, just don't know yet. I don't know all the factors.
I think we have time for one more question. Well, I have time. I don't know if you do, but
Yeah, I do.
But again, thank you again for these elucidating comments and all. Tom Nowitzki says, "Can you comment on false memory in the context of 1, the concept of fake news, and 2, the concept of gaslighting?"
Okay. So I can answer the first part. I don't know the answer to the second part. So false memory in the concept of fake news. In fact, I just went to a conference and went to a few talks specifically on fake news. And what they found is that when something is fake news, now, of course, I call fake news lies because essentially that's what they are, but I digress. When it comes to the concept of fake news, what they found in the research is that if you are in the same political affiliation as the fake news, in other words, you agree with what's being said, you're more likely to create that as a false memory as it actually happened. Yes, this definitely happened. If you are of a different political position, in other words, you don't agree with it, then you're less likely to create a false memory into believing that that actually happened. So what they're finding is, if again it goes with confirmation bias, right? If it goes along with what you believe, then you're more likely to go, oh, okay, and not it. Okay, so let me preface it this way: it's not just once they have to hear it; they have to hear it multiple times from multiple sources. They're hearing the same false news story over and over and over again, but it goes along with their beliefs. Then they're more likely to remember it as an actual memory. But if it doesn't go along with their belief system, then they won't remember it as a memory. So they won't have a false memory. So I always found that interesting, is that it has to match with what you believe. You're more likely to accept it, and then more likely to have that create a false memory because it matches. But you're more resistant to it when it doesn't match. And I thought that was interesting when it came to fake news.
That's interesting, because it that's almost like another level, because everything that you could have just said, you could have substituted the word belief rather than false memory, and of course that's what we hear all the time, and so now it sounds like you've stepped it up a notch, and now it becomes incorporated as a memory, which there's a subtle difference there, I know, between a memory and a belief or something like that, but it's interesting that you use that. Well, Jill, this has been wonderful. I'd like to thank you again for coming on our little show here and giving us this very informative talk and fielding these questions and staying with us for quite a while. And anyway,
it was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
Excellent. Thank you. And we hope to get you back, of course. And I want to promo our next talk. And we do have some more talks. We got one in July for you. In July, the Bay Area Skeptics will present another Skep Talk in our series. It'll be Mark Boslow, and he'll be presenting his talk, Tilting at Straw Men and Other Tricks of the Climate Denial Enablers. You can tune in on Thursday, July 8th at 7:30. We don't shy away from controversy here. So anyway, once again, this is Bill Patterson for the Bay Area Skeptics. Good night.